Hi everyone, I hope you guys are having a great week. This week I am covering the reading Supercrips Don't Fly by Gutzell and Holgan and the TikTok Why We Need Universal Design by Michael Nesmith. Okay, so let's define Supercrips. It is the most current example of how language perpetuates negative images and mentally values roles for individuals. This metaphor can often be found in media, PR materials, tech manuals, and media communications. So the supercrip metaphor understands language, representation of disabilities, and its connection to cultural meaning supporting inclusion through technical communication. Language represents socially constructed conceptual maps or images, and this is how we communicate. We gather meaning from relationships constructed with the world, people, objects, events, and the conceptual system. And that makes meaning socially gathered. As Hall argues, it is not the material world that conveys meaning and its value, it's the language system and how we choose to use it to represent our concepts. Foucault argues that language and social constructions are created by a framework of power relations. Language and meaning are shaped through various disciplines over time, giving us discourses. The most influential of these has been medical discourse, through which disability has been shaped and identified as a pathology located within an individual to be treated, remedied, or cured. Mechanical discourse has a mechanistic worldview which seeks knowledge and progress through examination of parts, separate from the whole. Terms used in early medical documents include the feeble-minded or deaf and dumb, and then other roles were used, which include patient, resident, and ward. During this time, disabilities were treated to integrate the disabled back into society. If the treatments were unsuccessful, they were segregated away from society. If there was no cure, disabled were considered damaged goods. These terms were used to pity the disabled, which in turn were successful in raising funds for research and service organizations. And these terms also reinforce minimal expectations due to the lack of positive characteristic and preconceived notions of the disabled. This type of language just reinforces the negative connotations for what it is to have a disability. For example, when most people think of someone who is in a wheelchair, they are filled with sadness, when in reality, there's nothing to be sad about because people who are in wheelchairs often are functioning members of society. This is a quote from Judith Heumann. She is an influential advocate within the disability community. She states, "Disability only becomes a tragedy for me when society fails to provide the things we need to lead our lives. Job opportunities or barrier-free buildings, for example. It is not a tragedy to me to be living in a wheelchair." When language changes race consciousness, disability becomes less oppressive. Using people language means using terms like a person who uses a wheelchair versus someone who is wheelchair bound. It is taking their identity away from only being a person who uses a wheel. While today's language softens disabilities, which is typically geared towards children, but when it is used to describe an adult, it reinforces the notion that a disabled adult cannot meet expectations that are expected of adult competence. Examples of this type of language include people with special needs, or differently abled, or despite disability. Using terms like despite disability reinforces the idea that something needs to be fixed to overcome the disability, i.e. the supercrip. The soft language may help the writer feel better about the content, but it perpetuates the oppression of the disabled community. It's just not as outright as it was in the earlier centuries that we saw in the previous clips. If the supercrip metaphor is eliminated, and those who are identified as having disabilities no longer have to be fixed or personally overcome their conditions, the way we approach the concepts and practices of universal space and product design, technical communication, and ultimately inclusive design are fundamentally altered. Technical communication should not fall into the trap of needing to fix disability, and good design principles and good technical documents should be inclusive. The process of distance assessment, stripping away context, and normalizing are at the root of defining people with certain characteristics as abnormal, failing to account for the situational and social factors that influence their competence. Certain characteristics shouldn't be seen as problematic, but the benchmark for inclusive design. Disabled people are often othered, which leads to unconscious internalization of an identity, and this leads to lacking what is needed to be fully human, which further leads to self-oppression, self-punishment, or denial. Disabled people have to reclaim disability. In his book, Disability Theory, Cybers writes about identity as well. This book theorizes disability as a minority identity that must be addressed not as a personal misfortune or individual defect, but as a product of a disabling society and built environment. Self-advocating groups are urging the government to change handicap parking signs to accessible parking or accessible to all. The term handicap has been accepted by older generations, but younger generations do not accept this term, as it reinforces the community as incompetent or as beggars. Technical communicators have a responsibility to gain experiential knowledge of the perspective and situations in which they are responding. Instead of focusing so heavy on the audience, we as technical communicators should shift our focus to the situation. This promotes solution finding and, in turn, increases the quality of everyday life for those with disabilities, including everyone else. Okay, now let's shift over to the TED Talk, Why We Need Universal Design by Michael Nesmith. Michael is a designer for Amazon, and he focuses heavily on universal design, and he also happens to be deaf. For his job, he has to make Amazon accessible for millions with different backgrounds. As a deaf person, his modes of communication change depending on the situation. Michael argues that everyone has a disability. This can include a broken arm, being a child, being pregnant, or just being old. These disabilities can be long-term or temporary, but we have to figure out how to cope and navigate around our disabilities. Nesmith included this quote in his video, and I feel like this is the perfect definition of what universal design needs to be. Universal design is a design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptations or separate design. This is a quote from Ron Mace, and he was a professor at the Center of Universal Design in North Carolina. Nesmith then shifts the video towards everyday objects that we use that can be accessible for some but not for all. For example, doorknobs are not as accessible for those with arthritis or children. What is a solution to a doorknob? A door lever, and these are easily accessible for all. Again, doorways are hard for wheelchair users and parents with strollers to enter, but everyone can get through a sliding door. Nesmith then transitions into an app he created. He got a file for a movie script, uploaded it up into an app, which allows people to have a timed app where you can press play and go into a movie theater and see the script on your Google Glass. He explains that it was rewarding to see other people have a good experience with this app in a movie that they would otherwise not have. Anyone can use it. People who watch a film in another language, or it can be used as a personal karaoke machine. When you receive universal design, it snowballs. Everyone benefits, regardless of disability. Disability drives innovation. Thanks y'all so much, and I hope you have a great week.